Hello and welcome to this substance pattern tutorial where we're going to be building up some wood on this furniture piece. And essentially what we'll do is we'll build up some layers from bottom to top to build a nice wood texture with some variation and dirt and wear. So we'll start off with these bottom two layers, which will build our basic wood texture, and then on top of that we'll add some varnish and some varnish wear, and finally some dirt to give us a nice basis for a model. You can take it further than here, of course, but you know, in this particular video we're going to leave it at that. And then on this glass, which is a mirror, we'll add in some details. You might notice there that I've added in some kind of textured model detail to the top, and we've got a mirror and we've got some smudges and dirt on the mirror. So that's what we're going to learn, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get something from it, and I'll talk to you in the next section. Okay, so let's get cracking and create our project. So it's File, New. I'm using PBR Metallic Roughness Alpha Blend, and I'll go to Select and select out my model, and then I'll set my document resolution and normal format DirectX. Use OpenGL if you need to, and other than that I'm going to click OK. There we go. Now the first thing I want to do in this one is bake my maps, and then just show you why sometimes it's a good idea to refine your maps. So let's go over to our texture set settings and click on the little box with the cross and bake the maps out, and I'm going to bake them by default to start with, and then we'll have a look at them. There we go. So what I want to look at here is my occlusion layer. So under mesh maps, ambient occlusion, and you'll see it's very dark in the shelf area because there's no light getting in there, you know, not much light at all. And if we use that as an effects map, it's not going to be very good because it's going to spread that effect all in those places. It's going to be very concentrated. So what I want to do is adjust my baking to get a better result. So what I'm looking for is kind of the occlusion between corners and edges and such like. So let's look at that. So back to our baking in the maps, and actually I'm going to put this up to 2048 as I should have done, and we'll rebake everything. So on ambient occlusion, I'm going to change my maximum occlusion distance. So if I change it down to say a half, and then click apply to all, because in this particular object I have more than one material, I'm going to bake those out and see what effect it has. There we go. Not an awful lot. So obviously I need to go down further, and generally as you do this you'll get a feel for, you know, how far you have to go. And in my experimentation I've figured out that I need to go down to about 0.1. So my minute distance is very low, my max distance is 0.01. It shouldn't go very far away from the surfaces that are occluding each other. So with that done, I'm just going to unselect all my other maps because I don't need to rebake them, and then we'll rebake just the occlusion, which will be quicker. There we go. And I was very foolish there. I didn't follow my own advice by clicking apply to all, because that only applied to my glass region, not my wood region. So let's rebake that quickly. There we go. Now it's looking sensible. So now it's just where my corners are, where two faces are kind of facing each other and occluding the light, and it's not spreading out too far, and it's not too close, but you know, you might want to refine it a little bit more than that. So that's given us a much nicer map there. You'll notice it's more occluded in the back. That's because there's just more sides coming together, more faces. So let's have a look at our curvature map. and our curvature map is very rough, and that's largely because I haven't upped my values. So let's turn ambient occlusion off and increase my secondary rays, and I like to increase my sampling radius here up to about 0.5. I find that gets quite a good result. We might refine it, but we'll see. So apply to all in case I forget again, and then bake selected. I forget a lot of things, I'm quite old. So click OK and have a look, and we can see that, you know, we're picking up quite a thick edge there, and on this shelf there's not much of a gradient between where it's got the edge and where the next edge starts, so that we've only got like a thin, quite, you know, still quite white line in the middle. So what we can do there is reduce our sampling radius. So if I reduce that down by half again and apply to all and bake, we should get a thicker line in there. Yeah, so it's starting to, you know, really come and delineate between the two. Okay, so that's baking our maps out. I'll just switch back to my material mode, and this is our kind of starting point. So in the next section what we'll do is we'll start to build something that looks like wood, and we're just going to use functions within Substance. We're not going to use any images or anything. I'll deal with images in another tutorial set, so I will talk to you in a moment or two. Okay, so we're ready to start texturing now, and I've just switched over to my wardrobe material. I'm going to go to layers and delete this default paint layer. Now what we're going to do is use a texture function and a color gradient to make something that looks like wood. So in here we'll first need a fill layer, and for this fill layer I don't want anything except color, and there's a reason for that which we'll get to in the next section. So then in our textures, in my filter I'm going to type in wood, and we've got this wood 01 here, which is a pretty good approximation of a wood pattern. So I'm going to drag and drop that into the base color. So first of all, it's way too big, so I need to update my scale on my UV tiling. I'm going to set that to about 4, and now, you know, it's giving us a, you know, a kind of a wood look, but there's no actual kind of color on it. So to turn this from black and white to color, we add a filter, and the filter we select is gradient. So by default the gradient gives you 3 colors to work with. I'm going to need a few more colors than that. I'm going to go up to 6, and to set this up so it makes a little bit of sense to me, I'm just going to change my colors here. So I'm starting with black, and then we'll go to a dark grey and near black, and then a little bit lighter than that, and then a little lighter again, a little lighter somewhere near white, and then finally we'll go to white. And now we need to set our position. So the color gradient works on, you know, the position in the gradient where this color kicks in. So our color 1 should be on 0, and then we need to kind of equally divide, to start with at least, between these ones. And if I 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, and then the last one will be 1. And now we can see that, you know, we're mapping our black and white onto our black and white, which is not what we want. So we need to change the colours, and for this I'm using PureRef, which is a donation program. So if you want to, you can donate, but it's very useful because you can collect all of your images together and bring them in and have it sit on top of your interface so that you can access it. And in this instance I'm going to click on my colour and then click and hold on my little inker dropper here, and wherever I point in the interface it will pick that colour. So I'm going to pick one of the darker colours that I'm looking for, and I think that one's quite nice. Doesn't have to be perfect straight away, we just want it to, you know, get started. So I'll just click off to close that, and then I'll do the same for my second colour. So I'm looking for something that's not quite the same but close, and my third colour, again, not quite the same. Whoops, be careful, that I do that a lot, changing my positions when I don't need to or want to. And I'm going to start to come to my lighter colours. And then finally our lightest colour. You could do more if you wish. Less is probably okay, but you know, I like to start with at least, oh, that one's a bit darker than I want it to be, so let's take some of the lightness out of that. There we go. Okay, so now if I click on Pure Ref down here, it will minimise, and that's now what our wood looks like. And it's not quite right, of course, never is, but we'll get there. So one thing we can do is work on our positions, and you'll notice I have accidentally changed my position 1. So I'll set that down to 0, and that improves it a little bit. I could take my position 2 down or up. I'm taking it down a little bit. My position 3, and then if I keep my lighter colours as the more dominant, then you know, I'm going to get somewhere near the effect that I want. Now you might decide later on that those colours aren't right, or you want to lighten some up or darken some even. You could always do that in you know, at any stage in the operation essentially. Go, let's take some of the, there we go, somewhere around there. Okay, so what we have now is a, you know, a very basic wood, and what we're going to do in the next section is start to build on this wood to give it some character, and then we'll build layers on top of it to break it up and make it, you know, our own, and make it look a lot more like wood. Okay, so I will talk to you in the next section. Next then, I'm going to add some variation in terms of how shiny and how our height is generated, and I'm going to do it on a different layer. Now you might think it's a bit pointless, but I have my reasons. So as I go, I'll explain why. Let's add a new fill layer, and this time I'm going to turn off everything but height and rough. Now if I want to use this function again, this gradient, which I do, not the gradient, sorry, the wood, base wood, I would need to put it in each channel with identical settings, and if I have a lot of channels that's going to take me a while. So what I'm actually going to do is, to this layer I'm going to add a black mask, and on that black mask we're going to add a fill layer, and that gives us a chance to drag and drop our wood in. So on our original, we made a couple of small changes. So hardness and knots is 1, and here we have hardness and knots is 1, that's fine, but our scale is 4. So let's update the scale, because we want them to match, we want them to be exactly the same settings. So now that I've done that, I can go and have a look at my mask, and should see that it actually matches the underlying very, very well. And now if I say increase my height and increase my roughness, I'm going to get some variations. So let's go to the roughness layer to start with. It's a little difficult to see, but if I increase that, you'll see we get some very white areas, and if I decrease it we get some very black areas, What I want to be is kind of somewhere towards white. And similarly on height, if we switch to the height channel, where's the height channel? There it is. We can adjust this down. I only want a very small value, and you'll see that darkened up quite a lot there. So we've used that mask, and we only have to adjust the mask once. If we have 2 or more layers where we need to use that, I find that using the mask can be, you know, a real time saver. So let's go and have a look at our material, and if I zoom out a bit, we should see that we've got some variation in our texturing, variation in our roughness. See, some parts are shinier than others, and if I zoom in, we should see that there's at least some height information in there, just enough essentially. So now we've matched those to our original. I'm going to group them together. So I'm going to add this folder and then grab my 2 layers and drag them in, and I'm just going to call this Wood 1, because what we're going to do in the next section is we're going to copy this and update our wood settings, and maybe change a few other bits and pieces, and then we're going to have 2 different kinds of woods on different planks in this model to give us some nice variation. So I'll talk to you in a few moments. Okay, so what we're going to do is create a mask now, and for this one we're going to create a black mask. So add black mask, and then on the this flood fill polygon, we'll select the islands option. I'm going to switch to the mask view so that it makes slightly more sense. Let's go to the mask view. So everything is currently masked, so none of this is being applied. So when I select an area, you should see it starts to appear, and I can select in 2D or 3D. It doesn't really matter. You know, you just need to make sure that you've got a goodly amount selected. So there we go. I'm going to select the whole of the cabinet, I think. Yeah. And then there's one of these doors. I'm torn between the left and the right. If I go left, it looks the same. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, frog in my throat. It's my own fault. So let's go that one, and we'll pick the bottom drawer, and we'll perhaps pick the bottom of the cabinet and the top. So we can always change this as we go. This is just us, you know, getting kind of used to it, or getting a start. So what we have now is some bits that are textured and some bits that are not. So what I want to do is retexture the blank bits with a slightly different wood. So I'm going to add a new folder, and then I'm going to copy these layers. So it's right click, copy layers, select the folder, right click, paste layers, and if I collapse that, yes. So this one I'll call Wood 2, and because I want them on the opposite polygons to this mask, I'm going to right click on this mask and copy, and then right click and paste into mask, and then right click on the mask and invert it, and now we're back to exactly where we were, except we have slightly more control now, because on this layer, on this set, we can do some things. So one thing we could do is select our texture and change it. So we've got a hardness and we've got a knots. So I could really take the knots down on that one, and that will give us a different looking wood. I could take the hardness down, or indeed up, to again get a different looking wood. But the slight peril of this is that I need to recreate these on my height and roughness layer. So what I do there is I just get up the old snip tool and I take a snip of the area that I've done changes on, and then in PureRef I can paste this in, and because of the nature of PureRef I can now just go to my other layer and pick my texture and very easily set my settings without having to switch screens or remember too much, because if you recall, I am an old man and prone to forgetting things from moment to moment. So now I've matched them up, but there's not much in the way of change in all honesty. It still looks like it's from the same tree because it's the same colour, you know, it's exactly the same colourings. So if you wanted to, on the gradient you could change up these colours a little bit. You could either change them to a completely different level, you could change the positions, or you could even just change the colours. So for example, if I really drop the position of colour 4 here, or position 4, I'm going to get a slightly different look. I could increase the position of 2 and I'll get a different look. So it's just a question of just tweaking your parameters to get it looking a little bit different. There we go. So rather than looking completely the same as the other set of planks, we've got a slightly different look. So it breaks it up a bit to give it a bit more of an element of, you know, this is a real thing. You know, variation is quite important, even at this base level where I'm not really expecting to finish. You know, I'm just expecting to get it to look, you know, reasonably good. Okay, so what else could we do in terms of that? And then, again, we'd need to be careful about our positioning on the base texture here. We have scale, rotation and offset. We could offset this by moving it around. So if I increase this offset, you'll see that it's changing position. So offset in that direction or offset in that direction. And I'm rather keen to not have too much in the way of vertical things going on. And yeah, somewhere around there. And it just so happens that these two planks are occupying what looks like a similar region. So what I actually might do, if I was being really conscientious, is swap those out in the mask. And that's relatively straightforward. So if I go to the wood here and I'm going to click on my mask to show it, I can see this is white. So if I take that down to black and click on it, actually because I've inverted it, it's white. So if I leave it at white and select it, it will remove itself from this one. But then in the material it will have nothing on it. So I just need to go back to this one and change it here. So let's go and have a look. So it's not selected here, so I'll just click over that and now it's selected in. So when I go back to my material, now it's picking up a different one to this and looks a bit better. I've noticed that when I did my move, let's have a look, that these two now look a little bit similar. So I'm just going to adjust that a little bit so that they're not. There we go, something like that. So that's good. I'm happy with that. Yes, not a bad start. So I do need to recreate those changes on the height and roughness area. So let's pop that into pure F so I know what settings I need to make, and go back to my wood and set them in there. So 0.44 and minus 0.38, and that should now line up properly. Let's just minimize pure F there, and if I have a look around I should see that the dark areas are not as shiny as the lighter areas, and that's exactly what we want. Okay, so that's changed up our wood variation a little. In the next little section we'll start to build up some information, you know, about where it is. You know, we'll start to wear some edges. You know, on the ground we might put some wear because it's been sitting on the ground. Perhaps some wear on, you know, handles or something along those lines. Just things about, you know, where people might have used it and therefore the, you know, the feel has changed. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so we have a reasonably nice kind of wood plank effect, but not necessarily varnished. So we're going to add a layer above our wood too, and we'll call this layer Varnish. It's a fill layer. And for this one we don't need anything but our roughness map. There we go. So we're going to set our max level and then we're going to wear it away. So if I go right up to white, it's minimal, and if I go right down to black, it's super shiny. So I don't want it super shiny, but I do want it perhaps halfway between black and the midpoint. Perhaps a little bit darker than that. There we go. So now we have a very shiny wardrobe, which is not really reflecting what's going on underneath. So that's okay. If you wanted it to reflect what's going on underneath, we could change the blend type on our, not height, roughness. So currently it's normal, but if I put it to multiply, it's going to take a little bit of the information from our roughness that we put underneath. I'm going to leave it at normal for the moment, and then what we'll do is add some dirt over the top of it. So we can either add a black mask here, or we could add a black mask above. I'm going to add it here for the moment. So I'm going to right click, add a black mask, and that will take the effect completely away. And now we've just got our underneath roughness. So on this black mask I'm going to use a generator, and for this generator I'm going to use the dirt generator, and that is going to put some of it back in again. And if we have a look at our mask layer, we'll see where it's doing it, and it's really rough at the minute. So what I want to do is actually invert it. I want there to be more shine than there is you know, dullness. So we'll click on invert and then go and have a look at how that affects our overall material. There we go. So let's invert again. See, we've got all these dark patches now. There's more dark patches than there is light patches. So I'm going to invert to get it the other way around. So there's going to be some dark patches in there. They might not be very obvious, but if we go to our roughness layer, we'll see what it's up to, or roughness view rather, and we can perhaps adjust this to do that. So the contrast will either soften everything or make it much sharper. So I'm going to make it a bit sharper to bring up some of those areas of you know, of wear. So let's go back to our material layer, and now I should have some very subtle bits all over the place where it's not as polished. you see where the shelf meets the vertical here, that's got a lot of wear around it because of the occlusion mask or the occlusion map. You know, because that's there, it's giving us a, you know, a worn effect. And you can imagine that if people are putting books in and out or knickknacks in and out, that can happen. So get it set to where you're happy with it. And I think if I just go and have a look at the mask again, where's the mask gone? There it is. What I might do is change my grunge scales. So if I take my grunge scale down, I'm going to get bigger patches. And if I turn my grunge map up, I'm going to get even bigger patches. You see, I'm getting a real contrast now between the two. And I want it somewhere about there, maybe. I don't want it to be too obvious, but I do want it to be obvious for the, you know, the case of an example. Okay, so let's go back and look at our material layer, and there we have it. I think I can start to see, you see behind the handles where, you know, you can imagine people brushing that as they, you know, grasp the handle and wearing it away. Okay, so that's not the end of wearing this. In the next one, what we want to do is wear away some of the varnish on the bottom where it's sat on the ground. It's been moved around and scuffed and so on and so forth. I just want to wear the varnish away, and we'll do that in the next section. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so what I want to do now is put some kind of wear on the outside of this varnish. So we've got a basic varnish with a bit of wear in it, but I want to, you know, wear it in more places. So I'm going to add a fill layer for that, and this one we'll call Varnish Wear. And I'm going to leave the colour and everything else on at the minute while we build our mask up. So I'm going to right click and add a black mask, and to that black mask I'll add a generator, and for the generator I'm going to pick the mask editor. So immediately you'll see that the edges are highlighted now where that mask is allowing that texture to come through, and that's because the mask editor comes with 0.5 of curvature immediately. So if I take that off, you'll see it disappears, and if I turn it right up, you'll see it gets stronger and stronger. And that's great, but I want to add to this some noise and some positional data. So positional data, I'm going to use the position gradient, and I want the wear to come at the bottom, so I want the white to come at the bottom in this case. So if I increase this, you'll see the white comes in at the top, which is of no use to me at all. So I'm going to just go into the position gradient options and check the invert button, and now you can see it's coming from the bottom. So I'll just adjust my position to get down so it's a little bit more subtle. Okay, so to this I also want to add some noise. So we're going to use the texture for that. So in this texture input we can get it to interact and blend with our whole mask. So I've just gone to my textures folder here and typed in grunge, and I'll pick out this map down here, which is map 4, and drag and drop it into texture. Now nothing will immediately happen because I haven't turned it on. So let's go up to texture and just increase the opacity on that, and you'll see that it starts to put patches all over the place and, you know, interfere with our edges, which is kind of okay but not exactly what I want. So first of all, on the texture itself, I'm going to change some of these options. So let's change the balance down to make it more subtle, and the contrast also to tighten it up a little bit. So we're quite, you know, the mask is showing things up quite well in some places and not in others, but it's not all linear anymore. You know, and you might not want this particular one. You might find that that's not quite the right thing for you, and we can use other maps in there. Of course, it's a question of picking and choosing which one you want. So I'm going to go for this spatter one here and see how that looks, and yeah, I quite like it. So we've got some small spots away from the edges. We've got some additional spots at the edges, and that kind of works really nicely. So on the layer itself, as I said, I'm not really interested in colour or height, metal, rough, etc, etc. I'm just interested in the roughness, and for these ones, because I want it to be more worn, I'm going to take this right up, and you'll see then that as I do that, those edges become duller, as if, you know, we've, you know, been kicking it for a while, or it's been moved around, or someone's banged against it, you know, anything like that. Okay, so, you know, you might only pick that up at certain angles, but, you know, depending upon what you're using this for, you know, you might be using it in an interactive environment where people walk around it and they'll notice those things. You know, if they're not there, it will feel weird, but if there are details there, like a bit of dirt and a bit of wear and a bit of rough, people notice it, and it, you know, it helps you not break the illusion. So we could add a bit of colour to that, but let's go back to our layer there and turn colour back on. So if I select the base colour here, I can also change the way my layer blends. So I've gone dark here, I've gone to multiply, and if I change the colour down, you'll see it really goes dark. But actually what I want it to be is lighter, so I'm going to set it back to white again, and then we're going to find the right blending layer. So let's try divide. Doesn't seem to do an awful lot, but let's take that up to really dark. You'll see that, you know, if I go sort of into the grey, it's making it kind of yellowish, which I'm not sure is the best plan. And if I take it to black, it's really yellow. That's the wrong one, sorry. Sorry, that's me being dumb. Yeah, so let's try that again. Now I've undone too far. Okay, so I do want it to be a little yellower perhaps and a little paler, but maybe not that much. So let's try taking down our blend, and that's not really doing it for me. So let's try another option of maybe soft light. So let's change the colour again. If I go dark, it's going dark. If I go light, it's lightening up a bit. But I've got my layer blend down, so let's take it up. There we go. So I've got a soft light with 100% opacity, and that's adding a little bit of difference. You know, where there's no varnish, the wood has paled and worn away and has been exposed to air and light and so on and so forth. So, you know, it's got some difference to it. Okay, so with that done, what we'll do next is add some dirt and edge detail into our model. So I will talk to you in the next section. Okay, so now I want to add a bit more dirt in general, and unfortunately for this I don't really want ambient occlusion to be taken into account because it puts too much dirt in darker areas. So what we'll do is add a fill layer, add our black mask, and then I'm going to add the mask editor generator. So let's add that in. So see, it's going to put dirt, you know, where we've put our wear already, and I don't really want that, or not so much. So I'm going to take the curvature down so it's not in exactly the same place. And I'm also going to open up the curvature and change my options. So let's go to the mask view. That's what our mask looks like now, and I'm going to take some of the bigger elements of this away. There we go. So it's really tight to the edges, and whoops, now I can take my opacity and bring it up, and it will be a bit happier about things. So there's a lot of dirt on the handles. It looks like it's going to put a lot of dirt on the handles and a fair bit on the edges, but it's really tight to those edges. It's not going to interfere with our previous layers too much. It's going to add to it. I can take the brightness down, but I think that's counterproductive. What I actually want is not to have it on the handles at this point, because those handles are too much. So let's pop a fill layer above this. Actually no, it's not a fill layer, I want a paint layer this time. So it's right click, add paint, and in this paint layer I want to select these handles. So let's do that. So I'm on the mask layer currently, and I'm going to click on these handles, and that fully adds it. But if I slide down to black and click, it will fully remove them. So that's what I want in this particular case, because if they're that dirty, it's just going to be completely unrealistic. There we go. Okay, so now we can continue with our mask editor to build up our mask. So on top of that, I do want a little bit of some other things. We perhaps have a little position, which of course I want to invert, and I'll take the balance down so it's sort of tending towards the bottom, and I'll increase the contrast a bit so it's a little bit tighter. There we go. And what else will we use? I think this is interesting. It's kind of the thickness of the mesh. If I turn that up, you'll see it starts to highlight the thicker bits of the mesh. But I don't think that's going to be useful to me in this particular case. Okay. Now, you'll notice down here we have micro normal and micro height, and I wanted to show a little bit on those. So on our previous wear layer, we had our mask editor, which has, let's go to the mask view, given us some wear and things and height depending upon where everything is, and I want to exploit that. So to do that, I right click and add an anchor point, and this is our varnish, just so I can identify it. It's our varnish wear layer, and now in our mask editor we can reference that anchor point. Let's go to our mask again, and I'm going to use the micro height for that. So in micro height I can now pick from resources or anchor points, and I'm going to select the anchor point, and all I need to do is now tell it what layer I want to use, and actually it's not giving me that option, but that's okay. Perhaps that's a new version. Previously I've had to tell it what I want to do, whether I want to use height or colour or otherwise, but I've got a new version recently and perhaps that's an update. So under micro details I can now enable micro height, and you'll see that that immediately adds that underlying height data to my mask, and I can affect the way that works by adjusting these sliders. So I can take the intensity down, the curvature intensity I can go up and down, and I want it to be quite subtle, so I'm going to take these down quite a lot. And let's try no effect. I believe, but I don't know for sure, that these AO ones are more down to the normal than the height map. There we go. So now we've got an additional level of dirt that we can put into those wear layers, which again is going to enhance our hole. So let's go back to our material view, and all we can see is a bit of white now. So we're going to go on to our layer and adjust our layer properties. I don't want height or metal or emission or opacity or normal. I want the roughness to be high, perhaps not quite as high as the other one, and let's put in a greyish to just show that it's a bit sort of dirtier in those areas. Doesn't look particularly great there actually, so what I'm going to do is use my colour picker, so left click and drag over, and I'm going to pick one of the darker colours within the wood, and then we'll adjust it. So I'll take that down a little, perhaps take some of the saturation out, just so it blends in a little bit better. There we go. So now we have dirt, and of course you can adjust it. So on my base colour, it's too strong currently at the moment, let alone the colour being too much. So let's take the blend strength down a little bit so it's a little more subtle. Subtle is always nice. There we go. Okay, so I think, you know, all we need for this now is a bit of how can I put it, decoration. We've got to do the mirror. I think I might change, I was thinking about changing the handles out, but I'm not sure. Yeah, so let's have a look at the mirror in the next one, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so I will talk to you then. Okay, so let's look at the mirror then. So this should be a simpler piece. We've got our glass map here, and what we'll do on the layer properties or the layers, we'll delete out this paint layer, and then in our libraries we'll go to materials, and well, let's have a look at aluminium, because that's going to be a good start. So you'll notice that aluminium comes in and it's quite flat, you know, not very reflective, and that's because the roughness is turned up a little. So the more we take that back, the more you'll see whatever environment you have reflected in the surface. So it's a matter of choice as much as anything as to, you know, what you want to do for that. I'm not going to have it perfect, I don't think. I don't like perfect. So there we have a mirror, but it's, how can I put it, really plain. So let's add a couple of layers on top of this. So another fill layer. This one I'm going to do with roughness, and I'm going to increase the roughness over and above what we had originally, and then blend it with a black mask and a generator. And for this one I'm just going to go with dirt, and you'll see that now we've got kind of a smudge in our mirror, many smudges. If I go to the mask, it will be easy to see. There we go. So I've got a big smudge down here where the occlusions come in, but we can reduce the level of dirt, and we can increase the edge masking because I want a little bit more of the edges. And yeah, let's see what else. The grunge scale, take that down a bit. If I take it up, it's gonna, well, actually it's such a small piece, it's probably, taking it up is probably not going to show too much in the way of repeating. I just want it to be smudged essentially. So let's go back to our material and see how we're doing. I can see that, you know, the reflection is clearer in some places than others. We could add a bit of colour to this, which might help us out a little bit. So the underlying colour is quite bright. You'll see adding in this base colour here of a grey has darkened up where the smudged areas are. If I take that down to black, you'll see. So somewhere around there, I think, just to show that it's worn and you know, not perfect. And that shows up those areas where it's not quite as reflective now quite nicely. Okay, so that's part of it, but essentially on this mirror we haven't got any fixings. How's it in there? Is it just stuck on? But I like to have, you know, maybe some kind of rivets, if you like, or screws at the corners. So what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to use some tools to add model detail to our texture. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so let's pop just some little marks on these corners to show that there's something holding it to the surface. And for that, what we're going to do is pick out a brush, and I'm just going to set my default to a hard brush. There we go. Basic hard will do. So first of all, I'm going to add a paint layer, and then I'm going to take my hard brush, and I've got a tool currently active which I don't want, or a material. I'm going to change this material out. Let's just take that out at all and just put it back to aluminium. So it's going to be essentially the same as our underlying texture. You could, if you wish to, make it a little more rough, or you could change the colour a little to give it a little difference, and then we're going to go in. But I'm going to turn height on and give that a little height as well. Might need to experiment with that. So I'm zooming into this corner, and I'm just going to click in there. And if I go from a distance, that's not too bad. Up close it's not great, but I'm not expecting people to come up to this and examine it too closely. So I'm just going to come out, see where we are, and establish it. I think it's too high, so let's halve that, 0.35. I think that's a little better. It's perhaps just not in the right place now. So one at the corner, one on this other corner, another one down here, and another one here. There we go. So now we've got some at least fixings holding it on. And as I said, you could use a different material. You know, you could go for iron, or, you know, somewhat darker and more fixing alike. But I think that, you know, if you're doing a mirror, you'd do something similar. That's my thought anyway. Okay, so I think that's essentially it. I will do another video where I decorate it using some other tools, but for the moment I think this is as far as I'm going to take it. And, you know, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you come back to watch more things, and take care and have a good time. Talk to you soon.